So I'm Patrick Johnson, and I am a doctoral student in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and this summer I had the ability to work with the Tom Brokaw collection, which, as you'll see, is a very important part of my life. So it takes time to figure out who you are, and it certainly takes time to figure out what you want. And so while the two do seem as though they're odd ways to start a reflection on a summer internship, they're entirely fitting to my journey, at least the journey to being here right before you today. Because I didn't expect to be here. In fact, I expected to be prepping 5 courses for high school seniors, crafting the perfect college essay, and ultimately sitting in my media lab with brimming smiles and deadlines of all of my former high school journalists. However, I also didn't expect a pandemic much like all the rest of us have not, or that I'm now going to be entering my 2nd year of my doctoral program. And finally, I didn't expect to be spending my summer working with the archives of the journals that is the reason I am standing before you today. So, my summer allowed me to move from a high school journalism teacher who couldn't think of doing anything else for the remainder of their entire life, aka growing old and teaching in the school that my entire family went to becoming a Ph.D. student and becoming confident in my abilities beyond the 4 walls that usually kept me trapped with my past. So my Humanity for the Public Good Fellowship internship was one that allowed me to create a timeline using Tom Brokaw's press passes that he donated to the university. Now, yes, that Tom Brokaw, the renowned journalist who has literally been everywhere in the entire world and is super humble about it. But these press passes are things that most people don't actually understand, nor do they believe really matter. However, many of these particular things got him into, say, the royal wedding, the funerals of dignitaries, including the last Japanese emperor and Princess Diana. It also allowed him to be the voice of reason for a number of presidential debates. And ultimately, that work inspired a number of journalists for generations to come, including myself. So in total, I cataloged over 500 files, spanning nearly 7 decades. And it included, ultimately, 152 of them in this timeline. 152 passes, 152 summaries, 70 videos. A timeline that is interactive for teachers to use with their students to teach history through the lens of journalism. And this timeline was market tested with journalism teachers around the country, some of which question if their students would even know who Tom Brokaw is. Ultimately, I have one last piece, one that is not going to be completed until the fall, and that's my one-on-one interview with Tom Brokaw himself. So ultimately, through this process, I gained a renewed love of history from exploring it through the lens of Brokaw's passes, something that is entirely unique and relatively unknown. I felt as though I was traveling with him, going on every adventure to Germany, Japan, to seeing Pope John Paul II prior to his last interview and his death. Ultimately, Brokaw was so happy that someone decided to look at this mundane object that he actually sent me a signed first edition of his book, Boom, the book that is the reason I stand before you as a journalism educator. Additionally, he shared with me a message. Quote, "Reporters expect to get into heaven on a press pass." If that's the case, then Brokaw will gain entry many times over. And that alone also helped me recognize that the unity a press pass carries, a camaraderie that few know and even fewer share. In the end, however, what I learned the most is reflective of myself. I am entirely type A. I'm also a perfectionist that's plagued by the desire to achieve that in all things I do. Yet history is messy, education is messy, and journalism is also messy. Brokaw's expensive and extensive, taught me that. Journalism, as an unexpected field, must be etched in pencil, as Brokaw's appointment book once revealed to me. The ability to change on the fly can mean the difference between getting a story and getting the scoop. Or in Brokaw's case, the erasure marks, the ones that showed change and aversion to perfection, were the difference between his assigned trip to Belgium and him getting the scoop and being on the scene for when the Berlin Wall collapsed. Yes, I learned I can't be perfect, and that eraser marks aren't the sign of failure, but the symbol of adaptation. So in the end, this internship and the archival experience I had with the Brokaw collection showed me the world wasn't made to be perfect. In reality, that imperfection is why we have so many stories to tell.